I always say to myself, well, where's the opportunity here? Opportunity is usually where most people don't go, right? The best fishing is where nobody is bringing their boats. The opportunity is always in looking at what most people don't look at. And most people can only think about, as you said, what's right there in front of them, because most people don't think long term. They can't think that abstractly about what's life going to be like a year from now, 5 years from now. Some people can't even think the next week. They're only thinking about the moment in front of them. Yeah. So the opportunity is being the person who thinks long term. Where is this going 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 5 years from now? Just asking yourself the question, even if you can't come up with a really good answer, just the fact that you're asking the question challenges your mind to start considering it, which is what most people never do. So the insight is in the form of the question, is not in the form of the answer.
Welcome to the Sales Gravy Podcast. I'm Jeb Blount Jr. filling in for Jeb Blount, and today we have an amazing guest. I can't wait to get to the conversation, but before we do, go check out Sales Gravy University. This is the most powerful training engine for sales leaders and sales teams for small businesses and growing sales teams across the world. You can access 1,000 plus hours of on-demand sales-specific training content that we film in-house and hand-curate ourselves from 40 plus experts. On top of that, you have access to live training courses, mastermind groups, and small group intimate training with our senior master trainers that train our largest clients. If you are a sales team or a sales leader that hasn't checked this out, what you can do is you can head to learn.salesgravy.com. That's learn.salesgravy.com. And if you'd like to check out a free course, use the code FREECOURSE at checkout. That way you can look at anything for free right now. So that's learn.salesgravy.com. Today, we have an amazing guest, Mr. Dre Baldwin, the CEO and founder of Work on Your Game. He has an amazing backstory. He's been on our podcast before. So, Dre, I'd like to turn it over to you. Just give a little synopsis of your background, and then we're going to dive into the topic of discipline, because this is a really powerful topic for sales professionals, leaders, and people in the business world. But first, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Jeb. My background is as a pro athlete. I always played sports growing up. I played basketball overseas for 9 years after I walked on at a Division III college, which anybody knows anything about sports, they know that D3 athletes don't even dream about making a pro, let alone do they actually do it. I was able to make it happen, though. Then start publishing on YouTube before it was YouTube. And players who were following me on YouTube started asking me questions about mindset for sports. I started talking about those things like discipline, confidence, mental toughness. Those players loved that message. And also, when I started talking about mindset for athletes, people who didn't play sports started hearing that message and said, Dre, the things you're saying apply to business. They apply outside of sports the same way they apply inside of sports. So knowing that I always wanted to transition out of the sports world into something different, that planted the seed in my mind that this was what I was going to do after I got out of sports. So my segue from the sports world to the business world was literally talking about the mindset tools that helped athletes achieve to the top levels and teaching those same things to business people. And that's pretty much how we got here.
I love the D3 athlete background. I was for those that don't know, I was actually a D3 athlete myself, and I didn't have the mental toughness to push on to the professional level, mostly because they didn't pay me enough, and I wanted to go get other jobs. But I was a pole vaulter for my D3 college, and I wasn't very good at it, but they let me on the team because I walked out and said, "Hey, I want to try it," and they had no one else, so I think that's why they let me do it. But man, that background. Yeah, man, that background's tough. It's, you're a true student athlete, and then I'm sure you remember there's no scholarships. There's no there's no like trainers that are there to support every time you have an injury. You have to go to the training hall and you have to sign a form and then get on the list for all the other athletes from all the other sports to go get your your ice bath and those kinds of things. And the other piece of this is that you are truly a self-motivator when you're at the D3 level. You have to do all the work for school because professors did not care if you had, a basketball game going on or if you had a track meet or whatever it was. You had a test, you better be there and you better pass it. So, one of the things that you started with was YouTube, and we haven't had a conversation about YouTube, you and I, which I find fascinating because you started out by just creating on a platform that in what year was this, 2005?
2005.
I don't really remember what YouTube was like in 2005, but those early internet, video platforms like YouTube, before it became the behemoth it is today, was not the landscape that it is now, where being a creator on YouTube was not a profession. It was not a thing.
Right.
And you saw this platform and started creating videos. So kind of what was it that drew you to that, and how did you shoot these videos? Kind of walk through like what possessed you to do this?
Great question. So the way YouTube started was I had, after graduating from college, I wanted to play pro ball, but no one was really checking for me to play pro ball. So even though we came from different sports, because of my background, my pedigree, it's not like you got a bunch of people knocking on your door. So to play pro ball, I had to go to this event called an exposure camp. For those who don't know what that is, it's kind of like a job fair, but it's for athletes. And you bring your gear, and you and 200 other people who all think they're good enough to play at the pro level but are not currently playing, we all play with and against each other for a weekend just to try to prove that we're good enough. So this is kind of like it's like a meat market, casting call. And I went to that event, did pretty well. And I got the footage from that event. So the footage was on this thing called a VHS tape. You remember those?
Yeah, I remember what they look like. I remember vaguely having to put one into the bottom part of a TV at some point.
Yes.
So VHS tapes. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that bottom part of the TV is called a VCR.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you. Yeah,
right.
That
So
makes sense.
we put so that tape I took to an audio visual store because I knew that tape, if anything happens to it, then pretty much all your footage is gone.
Oh.
If you leave it in the sun, if it gets wet, or you lose it, it's not like there's copies of it all over the internet. There was just that one tape. So I took it to the audiovisual store. They put it on a data CD, and that CD I put into a computer, and I uploaded that footage to YouTube. So it wasn't this grand scheme to get myself known on the internet. That's not how it started. It started because I just had some footage that I wanted to save, and the internet looked like a place that it would be around for a while, and I could create a digital copy to where I didn't have to carry it around physically. That was the reason I got on YouTube.
So did you tell people that you were doing this? Did you like walk around and you like, I got this VHS, this is me playing ball, and I believe in myself, and I'm gonna go get the CD done? And did you keep that to yourself? Were you telling people kind of what was what was life like at that time when you were like, I'm gonna go be a pro ball player, and you came from D3? I imagine that there wasn't like a lot of people going, this guy, he's got it. He's an NBA player. Like he's a pro basketball player. Like believing in you. So like, was it just you on your own, or did you have people who were supporting you? Kind of what was that like?
Well, nobody really knew me at that time.
Yeah.
So my family knew me, and my classmates from college knew me, and my teammates. And some of us had the same idea that we were going to try to play pro basketball.
So there's a group of y'all that were kind of.
We had the same idea.
Yeah, gotcha.
They didn't all do the same things, but we had the same idea. So I was blogging actually before I got on YouTube, but it's not like I had a big audience in my blog, maybe 1 or 2 readers randomly. So the footage, when I finally got it and I put it up on YouTube, this wasn't some big announcement. Nobody really cared because, again, what was YouTube at that time? And at the time, who was I? I wasn't even playing, I hadn't played pro ball yet. I just finished playing D3 college ball, and nobody really was checking for me in the basketball space. So this wasn't some big announcement, to answer your question. And I put the footage up there and just left it there. I wasn't paying any attention because, again, nobody's looking on YouTube at the time, even though it existed. So about 6 months later, when I came back to YouTube just to make sure it was still there were comments on the video.
Really?
And these were just random people, Jeb. And they were just saying, Dre, hey, not saying Dre, but they were saying, who taught you how to play? Who are you? Where are you from? What school did you go to? Where do you play now? How often do you practice? And what I realized from the questions, because they weren't coming looking for me. They were just going on the internet looking for basketball. And they saw this guy who looks like, okay, he's sharing stuff on the internet about basketball. Maybe I can get some information from him. So what I realized was that they were kids, because I was at the time 23 years of age, and they were maybe a generation younger than me. So these are 14, 15, 16-year-olds who are just coming to the internet looking to crowdsource knowledge about the game from YouTube.
Yeah.
Only difference between them and me was that in my era, when I was that age in the 90s, you either had to know somebody personally or you just had to understand how to practice. If you didn't know, you were on your own. Whereas now they could go to the internet and get information. They could crowdsource information online. And they, I guess, pegged me as a person who might have some information. So they started asking those questions. And when I started responding to the questions, that's when I realized there's an opportunity here, because there's an audience of people who want to learn basketball. And I realized, and this didn't all happen in one day, but I realized that I had enough knowledge that I could be an expert to these people. I couldn't be an expert to everybody in the world, but I could be an expert to them. And that's when I started to slowly, and this took time, make more videos specifically for the internet. I was specifically making videos for the audience on the internet. Hey, here's how I do dribbling. Here's how I practice shooting. Here's how you practice moving your feet on defense. So if you want to dunk the ball, here's some drills you can do. So over time, between 2005 and about 2009, that's what I started doing.
Just blow your mind that this is where we sit. We're this is going to go out on the internet. We're going to have all these podcast platforms, and you started this much like where we began, which was just, hey, this seems like what people might be doing, or this is a platform. You started with a blog, couple of readers, and really no traction, and you come back and you find some questions, and you, for whatever reason, just wherever you were in that place in life, you went, I'm gonna answer these questions and start making videos, and here you are. Right. So it's just like freak you out that the internet changed everything for so many people, including us. And I love that backstory, and part of what really inspires me is just the belief to go to the video store with a VHS tape and get it on a CD and put that on the internet. No one's supporting you. No one's really, like, other than your friends and your family, like, no one's really looking for you. And just going, I'm going to do this thing, just because you followed through on it. That is further than I imagine most people get. A lot of people say, hey, I want to go be a professional ball player, and they were at the D3 level, and they have these, dreams of it. And then, going to the VHS tape and then taking that to the store is kind of where they stop, because that just takes a little bit of effort, and it's hard to push through that because you get the effort, and then you got to put it on YouTube, and maybe they didn't know how YouTube worked. And, you were the one that was consistent to get it done. And then you realized dream. So you went and played in 9 different countries. How many countries were listed on your
Close
website?
enough.
Montenegro,
8 countries, 9 years.
Lithuania, right?
Yes.
You played in Mexico.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And in our last podcast, I know you talked about to Jeb about what it was like to play there. But I think that when we talk about how this can translate to the professional world, and tips, and people come to this podcast for how they can, crowdsource some knowledge for how to get better in their days. You have an incredible mindset and framework for having a mindset for discipline. And I believe in our last conversation, which is an expert voice on Sales Group University, you described the difference between a Michael Jordan, a LeBron James, a Tiger Woods, someone who is at Tom Brady's, people at the top of their game, and we love athletes, but this translates very well to the professional world. That the difference between them and someone who never made it to the CD, the store to get the CD to put it on YouTube, is not necessarily talent or information or skill. It has everything to do with what's right between your ears. So, were you conscious of this early on? Were you conscious of your discipline early on, or was it sort of like an unconscious competency that you then were able to identify after some of your success and say, okay, this is what makes me different, to start training other people on it? Like, what was that like?
I think the biggest difference, it wasn't even that I would label it as discipline. Some of these things that we're talking about here, it was really about matter of personal initiative. Just being willing to take the initiative to, first of all, just think to myself, I can make it as a professional athlete, just having the thought. Now, at the Division III level, especially in basketball, I don't know how it was in track and field, but in basketball, every player has the dream, the idea, hey, maybe I can play in the NBA, I can play for the Knicks or the Lakers, and if I can't do that, then I can at least play overseas.
Yep.
So every player says that. But then when it comes time, as you said, to actually take the steps to do it, that's a whole different thing, because now you have to make a commitment. There's one thing to talk, and another thing to make a commitment. So when I had to go to that exposure camp, it was in Orlando. I'm from Philadelphia, so I had to travel from Philadelphia to Orlando. We drove to Orlando. It's a 19-hour drive. I had to pay for the exposure camp. The exposure camp is not free. You have to pay to go to that event. I had to negotiate with my boss at the time. I was working at a gym to get the weekend off so I can go to the event and then come back and be at work on Monday morning. Then taking the footage and taking it to the store and then putting it on YouTube and all of these things. And that none of this has anything to do with actually getting a contract to play basketball. Right? Notice we didn't talk about that yet. So all of these steps I had to take, that was just the initiative.
Yeah.
Now the discipline drove the initiative, because when you have initiative to go do something, then you have to have the discipline to actually put it to work. So it's a combination of both of those factors, the two things the thing that you asked about. So the initiative moved me to actually go do the stuff. The discipline kind of fueled it. It was kind of like pressing on the gas pedal to go and make it happen.
I like this difference between personal initiative and discipline. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. I've always found that personal initiative is fleeting. sometimes. You could label that as motivation in some levels. Obviously, some of these things are a little bit deeper than just pure motivation. Wanting to go play professional basketball over a longer period of time is a dream that you set as a goal that isn't necessarily motivation. But I imagine that during that time, there were days where the motivation was pretty low. You didn't have all the wins in the basket. You didn't have all the comments on YouTube. You said you weren't really paying attention to it. 6 months later, you went back and saw these things. You went to the exposure camp. I'm sure before you got to the exposure camp, like the internal conversation, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And then you got to work yourself up to go talk to your boss and, hey, I need to negotiate for this. But then discipline is the gas that you use to drive the car. And I think you describe motivation just in my conversations with you and what I know about your content. You describe motivation as a steering wheel, to put you in the right direction, and then discipline is the gas that gets you there. Opposite. Okay, so discipline is the steering wheel, and motivation is the gas to get you there.
Yeah, close enough.
So how do you differentiate when you're in the moment? How do you identify personal initiative versus okay, I've got a structure. I think you can conflate the two, especially in a short period of time. Like you have 2 weeks where you're really motivated and you have everything going, and then 2 weeks later you don't have that. And if you think what you have is discipline, you're going to build discipline on this. You don't have reasons why or all of that. You can make a mistake by petering out too quickly, having too much fire, and then not having enough fuel in the tank to keep the car moving. How did you identify like personal initiative versus discipline in your own life? Help you move forward?
Well, in that period, I wasn't identifying any of this.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, in that period, Jeb, all I was doing was just asking myself logically, what's the next thing I need to do?
Oh, okay.
So coming out of the Division III school, nobody was checking for me to play pro. I didn't have any offers.
Yeah.
So I said, how do I create an offer? First of all, I need someone to, verify and validate that I am good enough to play at the pro level, because at the level that I had played at in college, I was only playing against guys who had no pro aspirations. So nothing that I did in college was proof that I could play in the pros. That's why I needed to go to an exposure camp, because I was going to play against other guys who were pro level guys. Yeah. So if I did well there, it basically superseded everything I did in college. So my first thought was, how do I find an exposure camp? That was the first order of business. Find a camp. So when I found one, okay, it's $250. That's how much it costs. I had to save up that money. I had to go to my boss and say, hey, I need this weekend off. And if he had said, I know you said had to kind of muster up the courage to go to my boss. It didn't really take courage, because if he would have said no, I would have quit. I would have went anyway. And went to that event because I can get another job.
Yeah, I'd have quit anyway.
Right. I can get another job. I can't get another chance to play pro basketball.
I like it. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So getting the weekend off, going there, paying that money, paying for the hotel, paying for the food. All of these things were considerations. I didn't have that much money at that time. So then going there to the event was the next thing. Now, once I got the scouting report and the footage, which was the VHS tape, now I didn't get signed to a contract on the spot. Again, I had to be back at work on Monday. So the next thing is, how do I connect with an agent? Because agents are basically the middleman in the sports world. They know people in the pro world who I don't know. But if I can get an agent to represent me, they can vouch for me that I'm good enough to play pro. Right, that's that was my next step. So then I went back home and I started cold calling agents. So there's initiative again. So usually in the agent space, the agents call you. You don't call them.
Yeah.
I was calling them.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to sell them on representing me.
How'd that go over? Like, did you just like grab a list of yellow pages, and then when you picked up the phone and called them, like, what did it sound like? What was your messaging to get them to talk to you?
Great question. So wasn't the yellow pages. Google was out there at this point.
Gotcha.
So I went on Google, and there was one source at that time for overseas basketball or worldwide basketball that had a list of agents.
Yep.
So I went to that list, and any agent who had a phone number, I would call them. And if it wasn't a phone number, there was an email, I would email them. And then I would Google basketball agents. So anyone who I found, I said, hey, may I speak to whoever? They would answer, and I say, well, look, I'm a player. I just went to this exposure camp. I have a scouting report and I have footage. I got to that immediately. Yeah, I wanted to immediately get to the point, because I've always had the mindset of a salesperson. And the first thing a person wants to know when you cold call them is, who are you and what do you want? Yeah. The first two things they want to know, right? They don't need all the back talk or the small talk. Yep. Rather. So the first thing was, I have a scouting report so that they can see a third party saying that I'm actually credible and I have footage so that you don't have to believe anything I say, because who knows who I am? I'm cold calling you. So you don't know if I'm even telling you the truth. So I have footage that can prove that I am who I say I am. So I immediately got to that point. So I called about 60 of these agents. I got in touch with 20. 20 of them said, okay, send me your footage. So those 20, I sent the scouting report, which was a link online, and I had to mail them the footage. Because remember, this is a VHS tape. Yeah. So I was making copies. So that thing at the bottom of your TV, it was VCR. I had a double-decker VCR, which meant you can make copies of your own tapes.
Oh, nice. Cool.
So I was mailing out copies of the tape. Of those 20, one of them said, I'll represent you. He became my agent, and that's how I got started playing pro ball.
I just like that push, the mindset of a salesperson. Like I mean, it just goes back to what you said before, where you said if there wasn't courage. If my boss told me no, I was going to go anyway.
Right.
I think that I think it bleeds into you cold call. Like, no one's reaching out to me, but I'm going to go be a pro player anyway. Like, I'm going to call somebody because nothing moves for me unless I go do that thing for myself. If you think about the principles of sales and prospecting, no one is looking for you as a sales professional. No one's going, hey, do I know somebody in my network who sells motivational speaking, products, or that works with sales teams with a sales training platform? The amount of people who are raising their hands looking for that compared to the people who aren't is vast. I mean, there's so many more people that aren't looking for it but need it, right? That agent, right, needed somebody to go represent. He probably had a space in his roster, wanted to go find work with somebody. And I don't know, can you describe this agent? Like, what was their mindset? Like, what were your conversations with them like? Were they a teacher? Were they somebody who took you through the process and held your hand? Like, what was it that made them take you as a player?
So this guy was actually a attorney, and he was looking to get into the basketball space.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of agents have backgrounds in law. So this agent was looking to get into the basketball space, and he was relatively new in the space, and he was looking for players to represent. Now, I, again, as a salesperson, had to think, how is he thinking? Because it's not about what I want. It's about what the person who I'm selling to wants. And I was selling the agent. So what does he want? Agents want to represent someone who is actually going to do a good job somewhere and generate income, because an agent gets a percentage of your income, or they get paid when you get paid. So if I'm not good enough to get paid, then him representing me would be a bad business move for him, because representing me is not going to make him any money. Doesn't make sense. So I had to show him that I was good enough to collect a check in pro basketball in order for him to be willing to represent me and invest his time in getting me signed, because he would have to put the time in to get me a contract, and he's not getting paid for that time. He only gets paid if he produces an outcome of me getting signed.
Like it.
So I had to show him through the scouting report and the footage that, hey, this guy is a pro level player. So that was my mindset. Can I prove to someone that I'm a pro level player?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you built a business case for him.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that was those logical steps that got you from Philly to Orlando. I'm building a business case for an agent, and maybe that wasn't your thought process, but directly, but you got the ROI for them. You said, look, I can draw a straight line from me getting a paycheck to you getting paid.
Exactly.
And this is how I did it. I really like that. Okay, so to move from this into success, right? You went overseas. You had several years of pro basketball success. You were getting paid, obviously, and you wouldn't keep doing it if you weren't getting paid, I assume. And did this agent stay with you long term? Was this person always your agent? Did you switch around a few times?
Great question. And the answer is he did not stay with me long term. He quit the basketball space within my first season playing overseas. So again, I told you his background was as a lawyer.
Yep.
He got into the basketball space, and he realized how nasty of a game it was. And before my first season was over, he told me, Dre, I'm getting out of the basketball space. I'm going back to being a lawyer. So the overseas basketball is a very shady game. So he didn't stay in. I worked with a lot of different agents over the course of my career. There were many times I worked as my own agent. I just started reaching out to the teams myself and getting contracts that way. So there were many times.
Then you keep all that money in your pocket, right? So if you're your own agent, like, it's a little bit more lucrative for you. I imagine that's over time you get some more connections. That's
technically, yes. But the way overseas basketball works for the most part is that instead of a percentage of your actual income going to them and you pay the agent, the teams over there pay the agent a fee for bringing them the player. So it's kind of like a finder's fee. So it's a little bit different with overseas ball, but it depends on the agreement you have with your agent. So it can be unique.
I got you. So you had multiple agents, and you were successful, to a degree, long enough to keep a career going for several years, which is an incredible feat. I mean, a lot of people don't have long careers, right? I mean, they typically have 1 or 2 seasons, and they go, "I'm out. I'm not doing this any longer," and they go get a job or something like that,
or they get kicked out,
You
don't walk out, you get kicked out.
You get kicked out.
Yeah.
So you had success, and one of the things that makes you different is you always showed up. I imagine that you were at a high level for consistency over talent, right? People want high talent, but they want that talent to be consistent,
right?
And that's not always super easy. I work with a lot of seasoned professionals who have lots of success in their career, but one of the challenges is sustainment. It's easy to have a lot of motivation for 3 months, 6 months, a year. Hit that quota. Hit 2024's number, and then it's 2025 is going to come. You got to do it again. You got to do it again. You got to do it again. What have you seen, and what have you learned about sustainability for people in the business world that you learn from creating success, as a basketball player and into your own business world? What should people key in on to sustain discipline over time?
Man, it's a great question, Jeb. The thing that I've learned about myself over time is that I'm a distance runner. I'm not a sprinter. And I've always tried to play the long game and look at how I can play the long game. The short game matters as well. Like, of course, you want to do a good job on this call you're about to hop on, or this stage that you're about to step onto, or this game that you're about to play. But at the same time, it's about the big picture and the aggregate of everything that you've done put together. So I've always been that type of thinker when it comes to my effort and when it comes to the things that I'm doing. How can I play the long game? Because I know the longer the game goes, the better chance I'm going to win. So that's always been my mentality there. What was the rest of your question?
Yeah, so we'll speak to that, right? So the long-term thinking, I come across this mindset a lot, and I have this mindset myself, which is, we're salespeople, so we like to hunt what's in front of us, and it's very tempting. It's easy, easier. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier than thinking 3 months out, than thinking 6 months out, than thinking 20. I mean, even 20 years out. Like, that's an incredibly hard thing to do, especially in a profession where that next meeting is right up on the calendar. You've got prospecting to do every single morning. You've got lists to go build. You've got all these things that grab your attention in the short term, but you can very quickly start doing the wrong thing, thinking you're going in the right direction, because our mindsets don't necessarily, go to the long game. So, like, what are some major tenets of long-term thinking that help you kind of steer the ship in a direction that will benefit long term?
Great question. Number one is that the opportunity is always in the opposites. And this is something that I tell my audiences all the time, is that even as a child, when I was in middle school, high school, I always realized that I always noticed that I had a different mentality than most of the people around me, even my own friends, my peers, classmates, teammates, things like that they all would think one way and I would think a different way. And I would always say to myself, well, where's the opportunity here? Opportunity is usually where most people don't go, right? The best fishing is where nobody is bringing their boats, right? So the opportunity is always in looking at what most people don't look at. And most people can only think about, as you said, what's right there in front of them, because most people don't think long term. They can't think that abstractly about what's life going to be like a year from now, 5 years from now. Some people can't even think the next week. They're only thinking about the moment in front of them.
Yeah.
So the opportunity is being the person who thinks long term. Where is this going 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 5 years from now? Just asking yourself the question, even if you can't come up with a really good answer, just the fact that you're asking the question challenges your mind to start considering it, which is what most people never do.
Oh, that's good.
Right. So the insight is in the form of the question. It's not in the form of the answer. You see, most people allow themselves to feel stuck, or they just stop, or they don't give any more effort because they don't have an answer to a question. But the key is simply asking the right question, even when you don't have the answer, because that's where the insight comes from. Insight comes from asking yourself a question that you can answer, and now your brain has to wrestle with that question.
Love it.
And in the process of wrestling with the question, you're challenged to think in different ways. And when you think in these different ways, now all of a sudden the new ideas start popping up because you're trying to solve a problem that you can't solve. And that's where the opportunity comes from. That's the insight.
Oh my, it's it's a blinding flash of the obvious. It's so simple, and we talk about this in sales a lot. And the best conversations that you can have are not the ones that you talk the most in. It's the ones where you ask the best questions.
Exactly.
And I often forget that you have an internal conversation, you have an internal dialogue, and
Right.
I never ask myself questions. I try and search for answers from myself, and this is a great way to turn that on its head. Ask yourself questions, even if you can't answer them. So then for yourself, like, what are some questions that you can start with to just you're thinking in the shower, you're journaling, you're reading a book, you're kind of, you have that alone time that you have in your day. I imagine that's when most people can practice this. If you're conscious about it and intentional, what are some questions that you ask yourself, or that you have asked yourself, that helped spark conversations with your own strategy to get to the next step?
I can give you a ton of them. We can have
Yeah,
a whole
let's
conversation
go.
about that. So one thing you can do, and yes, you can have that happen in those moments where the epiphanies pop up, like when you first wake up, you're taking a shower, you're in the middle of a long run or something like that. Yes, but also you can do it consciously, because if you're a type person who's never thought like this, maybe somebody's written a blog post that gives you 50 questions, 50 mind-stimulating questions. I'm sure there's a blog post out there about that, right? Where you can't answer any of the questions, but they make you think, right? They challenge you to think. There are games about that, right?
Yeah.
Board games and group games. So that's one way to do it. For me personally, the first one was, okay, if I'm going to play basketball overseas, what are the steps? I need proof that I can play against pro-level guys, because college didn't do that. I need to find me an agent who will represent me. And then I need to hope and pray that agent can get me a job, because once you get with the agent, you can't control who they reach overseas. You just got to hope you found the right guy. And that was one. Another one is about 2009. So in the middle of my basketball career, the way you have framed it, and I appreciate it, made it sound like it was all perfect. It was not. Once my career started, there were times when I didn't have a contract. Phone was not ringing. So any of you know, like, actors and actresses, you ever hear how they're like working at a bar or Starbucks in between jobs?
Mm-hmm.
And basketball works the same way. So it might not be a bar or Starbucks. It might be, Amazon Flex.
Yeah,
right? You never know.
yeah.
Something like that. And my phone was not ringing. It's about 2009. And I asked myself the following question: how can I combine three things? Basketball, having something that I control on the internet, and making money. How can I do all three? Because I knew I could play basketball. I've always been a computer geek. A lot of people didn't know that. And I wanted to make money. Of course, you got to make money, because I'm in my mid to late 20s at this point. And combining those three, that's when I really put my foot on the gas with the internet.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I was putting out videos sporadically, maybe once a month, every 6 weeks. We never got around to it, because who cares about, even if you're famous on YouTube, who cares?
Yeah.
There was no money to be made on YouTube. There was no ad revenue. And we weren't even using phrases like content or social media or influencer at the time. So it didn't matter. But around that time, that's when it started to turn.
Mm-hmm.
That's when everyone started to go to the internet rather than TV.
Mm-hmm.
That's when Google bought YouTube. That's when all these social media platforms started coming out. And now, being an internet person, starting to become a career aspiration. And I already had an audience. So by asking that question, I just finished reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. Years earlier, I had read Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where he talked about having assets rather than making yourself the only asset. Build assets so that you can make money from something other than just your personal efforts. I had this audience on the internet that somehow this can be an asset. I didn't know how. Again, asking yourself the right question gave me an insight. I know there's something here. I just didn't know what. I read Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss talked about, hey, you know that you can hire somebody in India or the Philippines to work for you and get a bunch of stuff done that you don't have to do yourself. And it costs a lot less than hiring an American. I never thought about that. Talked about how if you have an audience on the internet, you can actually create a product or service and sell it right on the internet and make money on the same day, right through the internet on a website. Again, I knew that was a thing, but I didn't know how to do it. He explained exactly how to do it. I followed it. Started selling $4.99 training programs. That's how I became an entrepreneur. $4.99, one for dribbling, one for shooting. That's where my business actually began. That's where work on your game started, technically. And then when it came to getting out of basketball, about a year later, I started talking about mindset. We talked about this at the beginning. And I was telling athletes just the mindset tools that worked for me, because I've been teaching athletes for years how to dribble, how to shoot, how to dunk, how to do all this stuff. They would practice it on their own in an empty gym, but then they would get in the game and they couldn't do it. So they're like, Dre, how do I take this stuff and mentally put myself in the right space so I can actually use these things? That's when I started explaining to them, well, you got to work out consistently, discipline. You got to have the confidence to believe in yourself when there's 1,000 people in the crowd, as opposed to an empty gym by yourself. Mental toughness to keep trying when you got cut from your high school team again this year, and you have to wait a whole other year before you can try out again. Or the personal initiative to, listen, you can't just sit around and wait for someone to discover you or find you. You have to do something to stimulate them giving you attention. So I started talking about these things, and of course the players appreciated it. But what happened is people who didn't play sports started seeing those videos, because I did a video called The Weekly Motivation. And that's when I would just talk about mindset. I didn't mention basketball. I was just talking about mindset. It was about a 2 to 5 minute little selfie video. But this is before selfie videos were a thing. So this is another new thing. And I did that video every Monday for 400 Mondays in a row.
Oh, my Lord.
And those videos became the foundation of where we are, this conversation that we're having today.
That's awesome.
Right, because what happened is people who didn't play ball, they would watch those videos. And they would say, Dre, I don't watch your videos the other 6 days of the week, but on Monday, I watch that weekly motivation.
I love it.
And that told me, okay, people who don't play sports, they want to hear this. And I knew I wanted to do something outside of sports. So that was my segue from the sports world to the business world.
But it all started with the question. How do I combine the three things that I'm good at to make a living when I'm not in contract as a basketball player? And just that question sparked an entire career that I'm sure that you maybe had a somewhat of a vision for, but again, it was probably so abstract at the time in 2009 when you were thinking about these things. You couldn't have envisioned this, but because you asked the question, you were able to get yourself there. And I like where in your journey you talked about these players who, they were practicing in an empty gym. That's, practicing like that is fantastic. It creates discipline. You do it every single day. Of course, you're going to grow your skills, but when you're actually in front of somebody, when you're dribbling that ball or having to shoot with, someone contesting the shot, who's way bigger than you even, or, like they're a forward and you're a guard, that's intimidating, especially if you've only been practicing and there's only like shadows in the gym and, there's no one in front of you to contest a shot and you get cut from the team. You practice for 6 months and then you get cut from the high school team, and then the mental discipline to do it again, which I think starts with the questions that you ask, right? It has to come down to, okay, well, how do I make the team? You get cut from the team. What do I have to do to be on that team? If I want to be a pro basketball player and I got cut from my high school team, what are the steps? How can, what can I do to change the algorithm? And you may not have those answers, but Dre has those answers. So then you find the route, and that's that personal initiative. I love all of that. So I think from the sales professional world, this is where I see the bridge, that long-term thinking, asking yourself the questions, like you get cut from your team, right? There's a lot of layoffs that happen. Or you just miss your number. Like you miss your number in a quarter, the rest of your year is tanked. You got to wait till 2025 to go hit the next quota. Or there's always a goal to go hit, and often we fail. Often we are not always successful. We don't always have an agent who's pristine getting us the contracts. So sometimes the phones are just not ringing. How do you speak with professionals that aren't basketball players? Like, what are some of the motivational messages you would share with somebody who, isn't trying to go be a pro athlete, but is in a business athlete position?
Well, the first thing is I'm not even trying to motivate them.
Yeah.
I don't even try to motivate them. And the first thing we got to figure out is, what do they want? What's the challenge that they're having, and where they feel like something's in their way? And sometimes people know exactly what's in their way and what needs to be fixed. And sometimes they think the problem is A, B, C, but the problem is actually X, Y, and Z. So my job as the coach is to provide the insight. Okay, yes, A, B, C is a problem, but it's not because of A, B, C. It's because of D, E, and F. We need to address these things. Those are the things that someone may not even come up with. And when it comes to being a professional, I always tell people that professionals depend on discipline, not on motivation. Motivation, I tell people, is for 8th graders. Motivation is for high schoolers. And motivation is, again, it comes and goes. You can't always depend on it. You can't build your business around it. You can't plan around being motivated. Some days you'll have it, some days you don't. But on the days that you don't, that is when the pros separate themselves from the amateurs. Because as a professional, which is defined as someone who does something as their main paid occupation, you have to show up and deliver even when you don't feel motivated, even when you're not excited, even when you did miss your number, even when everything is going haywire. You still have to show up and do your job, because that's what a professional does. And if you don't do that, you won't be a professional for long by definition, right? Right. So
You'll have a box with all your stuff in it.
Yeah, exactly.
And finding that next job.
Right.
That's
You'll
what
be
you'll
escorted out by security.
You
Right.
get kicked off the team.
Yeah, exactly. So the work on your game extended definition of professional is a person who shows up and delivers every time, regardless of what they're feeling, because that's what you have to do if you're going to get paid consistently.
Say that again.
Person who shows up and delivers every time, regardless of how they're feeling.
Yeah, I would just replay that for a few times. Just replay that for yourself. Okay, yes. No, continue.
Right. So that's what allows you to get paid every time. So those definitions go together.
Yeah.
So what I help business people do, or a salesperson or entrepreneur, is understand that we need to be professional about what we're doing. And a key hallmark of a professional is preparation. You're prepared ahead of time for the situation before it occurs. That doesn't mean the situation is always going to be something that you want. Sometimes it's something that you don't want. But when you can see it coming, it's easier to deal with. Like when you're in boxing, the punch that knocks you out is not the one that is hardest, is the one that you don't see.
Yep.
So as long as you see it coming and you can see that there's a challenge coming on the horizon, you can better handle it. So when it comes to the mindset piece, specifically when I'm working with professionals, it's just helping them develop what we call the bulletproof mindset. Getting yourself into a really disciplined, confident, and mentally tough state so that whenever, whatever comes around, you are ready to handle it.
Do you find that developing the bulletproof mindset is easier than maintaining the bulletproof mindset?
Good question. It depends on the person. It depends on what kind of clay they're working with when they show up. So if this is a person who has already had some mindset training instilled in them, they've had some conditioning when it comes to mindset, then developing it is not that hard for them. It's usually a challenge with maintaining it. But if it's a person who's never had anything like that before, then developing it may be a little bit harder. But again, it depends on the person. It can vary very wildly depending on who they are and what they've done so far in their life.
I've found both answers as well. That for some folks, because they show up with some idea of what a bulletproof mindset would look like for them.
Right.
That developing that can be a little bit easier. And the challenge with those folks is sometimes that because they know what they should be doing, it's almost more straining to keep it up. Because they and that I would include myself in that category. Maintaining it is a lot harder than building it. Whereas other folks come to the table, they don't have any of that background, so building it's really difficult. But maintaining it tends to be a little bit easier because that's the only thing they know. Some folks know what bad looks like and they kind of like it, and so then they know what good looks like, so they kind of just they have some bad habits that they fall back into. Some folks have no bad habits, and that's easier to maintain. There's so much we could talk about, so many more questions to ask yourself. To quickly recap, just the amount of personal initiative that you can harness is limited, but if you take those steps, you're off to a good start. And then from there you have to develop a disciplined routine to maintain the engine to keep the car going. Putting yourself in a place of mental toughness, bulletproof mindset that you've built starts with asking the right questions of yourself, long-term thinking, and then from that long-term thinking, you have an idea. You get the discipline in place, and then that way you can trudge up the hill. One last question for you: have you asked yourself a question that put you in a direction? You started creatively thinking, and you had a vision of where you wanted to go. You built the discipline plan, and it did not go well. Did you have a time where you made the wrong decision of where to move forward from, and had to adjust path?
Sure, I've had so many of them, I can't even remember one specifically. And the thing is, part of that mindset that we just talked about is just like with an athlete. So, for example, you take a baseball player. They play 162 games.
Oh, my gosh, yes. It's intense. It's like hockey, right? Just in basketball, intense. Y'all play so many games.
Right, and hockey and basketball is about half of that every season. And part of mental toughness, Jeb, is most people, when they talk about mental toughness, they're talking, you did something, it didn't work. You had to get over it and move on to the next thing, right? It's similar to what you just talked about in the vein of your question. But also another aspect of mental toughness is you did something, it went amazing. You have to get over that too.
Yeah.
Because what happens is people rest on their laurels. They relax. They kick back. They say, okay, well, let me just chill for a minute because I'm already blown past my numbers.
I got the milestone.
Right. I already blown past my numbers for the month and it's only the 15th. Let me just not really work for the rest of the month.
Yeah.
And then I'll work hard again starting on the 1st. But mental toughness is about you letting go of whatever happened in the past and turning the page to the next thing, whatever it's going to be. So to answer your question here, yes, I've had more ideas that did not work than I had ideas that did work. I don't know if people know this, but how we even ended up having this conversation here. Like, Sales Gravy never heard of me.
Yeah.
I reached out to you all, right? And sold myself to get in front of, first of all, Jeb Sr. and now in front of you here. But how many people did I reach out to who didn't reply? How many people did I reach out to that said, no, thank you.
Yeah.
We're not interested, or we're still reaching out and we haven't gotten a response yet. So I've had more that didn't work than that did work, but the ones that do work more than make up for the ones that don't work. And the thing is, the things that don't work, because of mental toughness, I turn the page on them and it's like throwing away some trash. Like, you don't remember the trash you threw away, right? You remember the stuff you kept, right? So yes, I've had things that didn't work, but there's no big one that sticks out so much in my mind that I can immediately recall it because I get rid of them. It's like throwing out the trash.
I like it, but I almost love more that it flows both ways. Because that is, I didn't even think to ask that question, but it's so pertinent. You have to explain mental toughness again for me, just so the audience can hear it, because I think it's so powerful the way you framed that.
Right. So it's, of course, throwing away the failures, the setbacks, the times that things don't work, the games that you lost, the sales that you missed. You have to be able to get over those and move on.
Right. And that's what most people think mental toughness
That's what most people talk about. Right.
Yep,
Socially, that's what we mean. But mental toughness also means that when you close the sale, you did great. You won the game. You won the championship. They say in sports, I think it was one of the Chicago Bulls assistant coaches used to say back in the Michael Jordan days, that you are only a success in the times when you are going after the goal. But as soon as you collect the trophy, you're no longer a success because you don't have a goal.
Yep.
Goal's already been reached. So you have to set a new goal so that you have a new thing to go after. So what happens with a lot of people, and this is the other half of mental toughness, is you have to be willing to turn the page on your wins, on your successes, and on the things that are your victories. Because when you start to rest on your laurels and get complacent, now time is still going by. Going at the same pace, whether you won or whether you lost, next day is the next day. So if you scored 40 points in last night's game, you don't start tonight's game with 10 points. You start at 0. So you have to do it all over again every year. And this is the reason why you don't see a lot of sports teams repeating as champions, because they got all the gratification from succeeding last season. It's really hard to ramp yourself back up to go back to that championship level again. That's why it's hard to repeat your success. And anybody in life, the most successful person is a person who can repeat their success. Not just succeed once, but do it over and over and over again, because you no longer have the underdog. You're not the underdog anymore. People may even be expecting you to win. Everybody's cheering for you. So where are you getting your motivation from? Where are you getting that inspiration from? You got to pull it from deep inside, because you can't get it from the external world. Because you've already been validated.
Comes from the discipline.
Right.
Comes from the discipline, not the motivation. Because if you have the laurels, but you have the discipline, you can turn the page on it and keep doing the same things that create success over and over and over again.
Correct.
This is a great place to end. I mean, incredible conversation, Dre. Thank you so much for being here at Sales Gravy and on the Sales Gravy podcast. Where can people find you and learn more about what you've got going on, and then connect with you?
On all the social media platforms, and thank you for sharing the platform with me, but I'm on all social media platforms, most active on Instagram. My Instagram is just my name, at Dre Baldwin. I'm on every other one. We publish on each one probably 10 times a day, so I'm pretty easy to find. Everything's public. As far as what we're doing, our biggest thing is Work on Your Game University. So we're on the same page as this university thing. So we got Work on Your Game University. That's where we do our coaching, consulting, speaking, etc. And of course, we got all the books and things like that. But once you come into our world, you'll learn about everything.
I love it.
We'll make sure of it.
I love it. Go check out Dre Baldwin. And if you haven't, go check out Dre on Sales Gravy University. He's filming classes right now, so those will be out very, very soon. That way you can go and learn from experts like Dre and 40-plus sales experts from around the world, including those here at Sales Gravy. We look forward to having you on Sales Gravy University. Check it out, learn.salesgravy.com. If you haven't taken a course yet, use code FREECOURSE at checkout. This has been the Sales Gravy Podcast. Thank you so much, Dre, for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, I'm doing a happy dance because you watched this video. Make sure that you click like and subscribe so that you never miss one of our amazing sales training videos.